Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Japan Politics Podcast. And in this post-election special, we're looking at Japan's 2025 election and just sort of going over the results, really. Now, I'm going to go party by party and look at the results and how everyone did. But first, I just want to quickly cover a few quick things. So firstly, to summarise, what was this election? Well, it's Japan's 2025 election held 20th of July 2025, and this is for Japan's upper house, the House of Councillors. Now, it's slightly the more subservient house generally, as opposed to the other house, Japan's lower house, the primary place where legislation comes from in Japan. And in this election, 124 seats were up for grabs, really. So that 124 is the number you're looking at overall. And what is the background to this election? Well, a lot's happened since the 2024 lower house election, which was a bit of a blow for Ishiba back then, and the LDP. And really, the context everyone's looking at for this election was, how bad is it going to be for the LDP? Because they've had struggles in the last year since the previous election. There's been the rice crisis, where there's been a shortage of rice. It's been more expensive. There's been inflation, of course. There's been scandals that were present before the 2024 election, like the church scandal, which was affecting the popularity of the LDP, and the slush fund scandal. Now, Ishiba was brought in as the new prime minister to sort of be a reformist outsider figure, outside of the Abe faction, but he has now had his own scandal of the gift scandal, where he was accused of handing out small amounts of money to first-year lawmakers. Now, he said he didn't do anything wrong and it was a custom of giving out his own money, but nonetheless, that seems to have had an impact on Ishiba's reputation going into this. And so sort of the context is that people are generally, in many respects, a bit frustrated with the LDP government, and so people are sort of wondering, how bad is it going to be for the governing party, the LDP? It's also worth noting that elections attendance was up, and I think you can probably guess why, given all the things I've just mentioned, the frustration. Obviously, that's going to be motivational for people who are upset with the LDP, but there's also, I think, the Sanseito factor. Now, Sanseito are a relatively new party in the scene. They were only founded in 2020. They've had a bit of a breakthrough in this election, which I'll get to, but their appeal is largely focused on younger people, people who perhaps wouldn't traditionally turn out as much, but they make up a big part of their supporter base. So I wonder if the fact that attendance is up for this election is partly down to Sanseito. And the election was up by 6.5%, and so you think maybe also opposition were motivated because they were frustrated with the LDP, the Sanseito getting out younger voters, and also you might think that possibly more left-wing parties, given sort of the strong rhetoric that Sanseito were using, perhaps they were a bit more motivated than usual as well. For example, you had the Communist Party and leftists generally sort of going online and making fun of Sanseito by using the melon pan and sort of an online trend to say they're sort of conspiracy theorists and extremists. All of that has fed into quite an interesting election of the LDP feeling that they're under threat, and this new Sanseito party emerging and introducing a lot of anti-immigration, sort of populist rhetoric into the discussion. So with that brief summary hopefully over with, let's go party by party and look at how each party's done to get a picture of the results overall in the 2025 election. Now, the LDP, I think you have to start there. They're really the governing party of Japan, and this election was all about how badly are they going to be punished. And the answer to that is, well, not as bad as you might have thought they were. There was a lot of speculation in the very recent build-up to the results that things were going to be quite bad for the LDP, that people seemed quite confident that they would lose their majority. Now, the amount of seats they were targeting was 50. Now, that's the amount they needed to hold on to their majority in the upper house. They've already lost their majority in the lower house in the 2024 election, and so Ishiba really wanted to at least hold on to that working majority in the upper house, just make his life a bit easier, as a little bit of a vindication that there was a mandate for him to carry on and to just make getting legislation for a bit easier. Some LDP lawmakers were not happy with that. They thought they should go for a more punchy target of 60. But in the end, he's come up short. They've not even got the 50 target that Ishiba wanted. They've come up with 47 seats overall, combining the LDP and Komeito. So really quite disappointing. LDPs themselves got 39 of that 47. So yeah, I suppose if you were trying to be very nice, you could maybe say, when you look at all the problems that Ishiba's had, the LDP have had, rice crisis, inflation, Trump tariffs, scandal after scandal, and just really struggling to get a good start for Ishiba. Maybe his like slow and steady, staying calm leadership, not making any drastic decisions. Maybe you could say he's been a little bit vindicated and that it's not a complete disaster, and he's just about retained. He's only just shy of what he would need to gain to retain control of the upper house. And perhaps if he just does a little bit of politicking and folds in some people in, he can get to that 50 figure. And possibly he might bring in a coalition partner as well. But you have to say it's yet another instance of a bad election. He's lost his majority. I mean, there's no really way to spin that. He's lost the LDP's majority, and they've lost seats. It's just another bad result, sadly. Now Ishiba is pledging to carry on. Says he's going to remain as prime minister. I imagine he will do that for quite some time, just because there's no clear successor at the moment. But I think it's just a bad result and troubling. And if you also look at the votes, it's also very negative in terms of the total votes that the LDP have received. It's a bad picture there as well. So they've had 24.47%, still the largest in the constituency vote, but that's down by around 14%. They've had 21.65% in the national vote, but that's down by about 12.78%. Really quite poor for Ishiba and the LDP. Now, the CDP, the Constitutional Party, they've had a bit of a meh result, I'd say. They have got 22, and so they're only down by -1 in terms of a seat change. Now, they've sort of gone a bit back and forth, the CDP, in the past year. They wanted, as the largest party, the biggest opposition to Ishiba, to put their case forward of alternatively becoming the prime minister, and that could have happened if everyone had swung behind them, but that didn't work out for them. They didn't manage to coalesce a big coalition and get enough votes to keep the LDP out. They've been talking back and forth about the possibility of having a no confidence vote in Ishiba. In the end, they opted not to do that after a lot of back and forth. I think they said the reason they weren't going to was they didn't want to, with sort of the looming threat of Trump's tariffs over them. And I suppose you could say that's smart in a sense, because LDP have had these big losses, but they've really not benefited from them themselves. They've really not captured the spotlight, and they've lost one seat. But again, they're in a prominent position. They've captured 22 seats. It's a respectable result, you'd have to say. They have seen a slight uptick in the constituency vote, but apart from that, and a very, very tiny decline in also the national vote. But really, it's sort of a bit of a meh result. I mean, there's not been much of a needle move for the CDP. So I suppose they're just sort of taking a position of slow and steady, which sort of reflects their how they've treated Ishiba with no confidence voting him. They've sort of just hung in there, and they're sort of letting him make mistakes and waiting for their moment. And the electorate has responded by not really awarding them much or taking away much. So they've sort of just held ground, really, the CDP. But as I say, they're still in a very prominent position, and we'll have to see what they do going forward as well. Now, the DPP, led by Tamaki, have done far better than they were predicted. They had a bit of a dip in the polls leading into this election. Now, the centrist party had a fantastic 2024 result. They increased their seats. But as I say, they had this dip, and that followed partly because the leader, Tamaki, he had a couple of scandals. Firstly, he had an extramarital affair, the leader of the DPFP. And then also, he recently was asked in an interview why the DPFP wasn't doing better with women voters. And his response to that, and bear in mind he was speaking in English, was to say, they're not understanding our policies, basically implying it's their fault. And there's something, it's they're at fault for not being able to understand it, which is a little bit insulting. But despite that little setback, it seems they've done quite well. They've largely increased their seats. They've gained 12. They're up by 12. And they've got a total of 22 seats. So they've won 17 seats, so an increase of 12 there. And they're now on a total of 22. So really very positive. And they've seen a healthy increase in their vote share. Their constituency vote has gone up by around 8%. They're on 12.14%. And they've seen a 6.92% in the national vote. They're on 12.88% roughly. So really very positive. I mean, suppose people just generally turned up for them, were fairly happy. Maybe it showed in the odd opinion poll that they were just a bit disappointed by their campaigning and those couple of scandals. But in the end, people showed up for them, and they've had yet another good election. They've increased their seat total by 12, and they've put themselves in a fairly prominent position. So, yeah, you'd have to say they've done quite well out of this, the DPFP. So quite a good result for them. Now, I don't think we can wait any longer. We have to talk about arguably the biggest story in this election, which is Sanseito. They've captured all the headlines. We've talked about their rhetoric, what this means, having a populist right-wing party become so popular in Japan. At one point, they overtook DPFP in the polls. And as I say, they've really just captured the conversation this election, Sanseito. They only had one seat going into this election in the upper house of Japan, and they've really established a presence for themselves. They've gained 14, which is making quite a statement. In the end, they did get more in terms of gains than the DPFP, and have just really moved the needle. And I think they were going after traditional LDP voters this election, as well as their traditional voter base of sort of younger people who didn't vote before. They've got a bit of a younger voter base. And I think you can see that has paid dividends when you look at... It's hard to look past the LDP suffering and losing their majority and losing 18 seats, and then to look at Sanseito, who are going after sort of the maybe voters on the further right of the LDP and their traditional voters, describing themselves as the Liberal Democrats of the good old days. And they've pulled it off and broken through. So they've proven that populist right-wing rhetoric, introducing anti-immigration rhetoric into the conversation can work. I suppose if you were to naysay that, you'd say it was only 14 seats. But, I mean, coming from only one, I think you have to say it's an impressive result, and they've done very well to break through in that way. And so, yeah, they've done very well. In terms of the constituency vote, they've gone up dramatically, which makes sense given how we're starting from such a low position, but they've ended up on 15.67% of the constituency vote, so up 11.87 roughly. And nationally, they've gone up by 9%, 9.22 to 12.55. And so really they've done very, very well. And it'll just be interesting to see where they go from here. Will they continue to grow support and become a larger party, or have they hit maybe a ceiling of this sort of 12 and 15 or so percent that they got in the national and regional votes? We'll just have to wait and see, but it'd be very interesting to see where they go from here, as I say. Komeito very much have suffered, aligned with the LDP in terms of how they've done as their coalition partner. They've sort of suffered for going along with them, as minor coalition partners almost always do in politics. They nearly always suffer. But Komeito have also done badly and not compensated for the LDP in terms of giving them enough seats to make up a workable majority. They've lost 6 seats, and they've gone from... And they've got a total of 21, whereas before they had 27. They've also gone down slightly in the constituency vote. They've gone down by 1.4 to 5.37, and they've gone down in the national vote by 2.85 to 8.81%. I mean, not much to say, really. I mean, they've sort of been tied up in sort of the backlash to the LDP as well. But they've held onto a sizable block, and with LDP, they can nearly form a working minority. They're just short by 3 seats combined. So we'll have to see if LDP are able to get it together, carry on and rebound, and if that will also benefit Komeito going forward as well. But as I say, they've sort of suffered by association there, really. Ishin have done a little bit worse than the CDP. They've been a little bit more willing than the CDP to sort of work with the LDP in government. They've sort of cooperated with them on some legislation. Their seat hasn't changed very much. They've lost 1 more seat than the CDP did. They've lost 2, which means they've now gone from a total of 21 to 19, so they're down 2. They've had a bit of a dip in terms of the constituency vote. They've gone down to 5.84, so they're down by 4.57. And in the national vote, they've gone down 7.41 to 7.39, so that's quite a big drop-off. So I wonder if they're sort of being punished for maybe not having a strong stance, much like CDP have, of like, oh, how do we target the LDP, but not making any effort to really rein them in or bring them down, but also Ishin have been more willing to work with them, as I say. It's worth noting, though, that they did retain Ishin 2 seats in Osaka, and they did make 1 gain in Kyoto. So this sort of cooperation they were talking about with CDP appears to have paid off, where they were basically going to not step in each other's way, and they were going to cooperate in terms of placing candidates. That, when you look at the numbers, they've had like a 4.57 in the constituency vote fall and a 7.41. That's a dramatic fall, but they've only lost 2 seats. So you possibly see that a bit of vindication in terms of cooperating with the CDP there. And you could also explain possibly the drop in these votes by the fact that they've stood down some candidates rather than insisting on standing them everywhere and potentially getting in CDP's way and vice versa, causing more pain for the CDP. But so that it looks like that cooperation has really potentially paid off when you look at the vote shares go down, but they've only lost a couple of seats. But really, they've maybe not sort of stamped their message as much as they would like. They've lost regional and national votes, and so we'll have to see what Ishin do going from here. Will they be willing to work with the LDP going forward? Will they maybe look for maybe a bit of a clearer message in the future? Be interesting to see where they go from here. Now, it's very interesting. Japan's Communist Party have done, I'd have to say, terribly, which is really interesting because I thought, I suppose it just shows that real life isn't online. I thought they'd been a little bit revitalized by the presence of Sanseito and this sort of populist right-wing anti-immigration rhetoric. I thought it maybe gave them a sort of a bit of a more of a purpose, the Japan Communist Party. They were really getting active online, going after them. There were things like the melon pan trend of like pointing out, basically accusing Sanseito of being conspiracy theorists and poking fun of them online and sort of spreading that melon pan meme. But it's not amounted to anything in terms of, and quite the opposite. They've had a very bad result. Now, they won 3 seats. They were on 11 seats, and now they're on only 7. So they've declined by 4, a -4 seat change. And their constituency vote is down by 2% to 4.79. And their national vote is also down by 2% to 4.84. So all this online rhetoric, all this creating a bit of a buzz going up against Sanseito, it's garnered absolutely nothing for them, and they've lost ground, if anything. And it sort of really raises the question of Japan's Communist Party. It's the oldest party in Japan. It's got a lot of history. It once was a very prominent party, and it looks like it's just continuing to dwindle, and it also lost ground in the 2024 election as well. And they further declined in this election. So you're sort of wondering where they go from here, really. And also, it's worth mentioning that one candidate, Akihiko Kurabayashi, now she is a representative, or were rather a representative of the Japanese Communist Party in the Council of Councillors since 2013. So that's quite a length of service. They've been unseated in this election, and I think that really sort of sums it up, really. Like, such a long-standing Communist Party candidate present in the House of Councillors for that long in Kyoto, and they've lost that long-held seat there. And so it just shows that the presence of the Japanese Communist Party is diminishing, and you sort of wonder where they go from here and what they can do to turn it around. And I think that leads us on rather neatly to Reiwa, because all this talk about online about the Japan Communist Party looking to revitalise and making themselves the opposition to Sanseito, well, Reiwa perhaps are a little bit better at that and have been more better at capturing the attention of young people, putting themselves in the spotlight, and they're a much newer, younger party, and they've had a modestly good election, I'd say. If any party has stood in opposition to sort of the conservative parties of Japan and pitched themselves as sort of a left-wing populist candidate and characterised on the moment by being a bit different, then you'd have to say Reiwa have done it. Not in any big dramatic shift, but they've had modestly good results, you'd have to say. They've gained a seat. They were on 5. They've won 3, and so they're now up to 6 seats, so up by 1 seat. And they've had a modest improvement in their constituency vote. They've gone up by 1.32. to 3.18 total, and they've gone up by 2.19% to 6.56. So not too much to say there, but just, I mean, there's been really no like big. The story is of a decline among sort of the centre right, and the big emergence is from Sanseito in terms of gaining votes, and elsewhere it's really just a story of gradual decline, and they're really the only one, apart from the DPFP, a centrist party, to win out from this election. But yeah, it appears there was no room for Reiwa. They did quite well in the 2024 election, but they've only had this like moderately good result. But still, they've gained one seat. I mean, they can't complain about that. This maybe fuels an argument that if there's going to be a sort of a left of centre, left-wing populist party, that perhaps Reiwa can reasonably argue that they might be the future and not the Japan Communist Party, despite their long history and them holding more seats overall. But they're very close to them in the House of Councillors. They're only one seat behind. And as I say, they've got this small amount of momentum. So we'll have to see where Reiwa look to develop their message, if they look for cooperation with the Japan Communist Party, or if they look to supplant them as sort of the more left-wing party alternative. Finally, now there's been all this talk about right-wing populism, anti-immigration message. Now, Naoki Hayakuta's party, the Conservative Party of Japan, now they've got in on that action, but really Sanseito, who before was sort of really a comparable rival when you look at the 2024 election, they both won, I believe, the same amount of seats. Well, whereas Sanseito have had this big result, they've won millions of votes and gained an additional 14 seats. There's been a much more modest breakthrough for the Conservative Party of Japan, who are sort of a more draw their support from sort of older, more traditional voters. I thought perhaps they might have had a big result in Nagoya, where they've got this sort of support block where they've got the mayor of Nagoya is part of their party, the Conservative Party of Japan. But they've sort of really not made a big push on the constituency vote. They've sort of really focused it on the national vote, and that's where they've had a modest success. Now, previously, they had no seats in the House of Councillors, the upper house. They've now won 2, and so they've gone up 2, and they've got those from the national vote, I believe. Now, like I say, I believe they focused on that national vote, but their constituency vote, which they didn't contest last time, was 650,000, roughly 652,000. But in the national vote, they've got a big chunk. They've got 5.04%, and so that's a nice little breakthrough first result. By means of comparison, Sanseito had 12.55, and they've also won the Conservative Party of Japan 2.98 million votes in the national vote. But nonetheless, this is a big mark in terms of establishing them as a party of Japan. It puts them on the map a little bit. It gives them their first representation in the House of Councillors. And so while they haven't had this big dramatic moment like Sanseito of really capturing the zeitgeist, they've sort of laid their flag down, left their calling card, and established a presence for themselves in the upper house. They've had a good result, I would say, and improved on it. And so I don't think that's anything to sneeze at all. I think they've had a good result just by getting those 2 seats in as again a very new party. And although they haven't had this gigantic, dramatic breakthrough that Sanseito have, I think it shows that populist right-wing campaigning in Japan can be effective, and they've won seats off the national vote as a result. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here. Will they look to develop more of a constituency vote ground game, or will they just continue in a sort of a similar manner of trying to get the word out there, win more national votes, and try and grow that way? Or will they look to develop sort of more regional support going forward? Be interesting to see where Naoki Hayakota goes with the party from here. But I'd say that's quite a modestly successful result. So that rounds out just sort of covering the raw results, really. But there's a few interesting talking points I'd like to look at. The one is that there's a new party that's emerged by winning their first seat, and that is Team Mirai. They've secured their first victory in Japan's upper house. Now, they're sort of a futurist party. They want to sort of use AI to sort of make decisions and lead Japan into the future. Their leader, for example, Anno, is an artificial intelligence engineer, so you can sort of see the background there. And their sort of broad aim is to use AI and technology to reflect public opinion in decision making and sort of aid decision making that way. So well done to them. It's interesting to see like a new futurist party breakthrough, and we'll have to see where they go from there. That's quite interesting. Another talking point is that there's been a record number of women elected in this election. I believe there was also a record-breaking number of women elected in the 2024 election, so that's a possible trend. So the record number is that 42 female candidates were elected in this 2025 election, and that represents 33.6%. And so that's up from that's 42 up from 35 in the last election in 2022. So as I say, that represents a sort of a broader trend. If you look at the there was also a record number of women elected in the lower house in the 2024 election. So that's quite interesting to see. Another interesting fact is that Tachibana, we've talked about a few times before, the leader in the past, the disputed leader of the anti-NHK party. Now, he also ran on this sort of anti-immigration message, and he ran in Hyogo province, where he previously ran as a sort of a supporting candidate under Governor Saito. Now, he was also, like, as I say, pushing this anti-immigration populist message to try and get elected in Hyogo alongside the Conservative Party of Japan and, of course, Sanseito. Unlike those two, though, he wasn't elected in the end. He's a very interesting figure who seems to pop up in Japanese politics in slightly unpredictable ways a lot, so I was interested to see how he would do. But appears he didn't win, and he's vowing to sort of to carry on and continue supporting Governor Saito. So I think that sort of rounds out the interesting points, really. I mean, it's sort of too early to predict where we'll go from here. I mean, it'll be fascinating to know if Ishiba's talk, his vows to stay on and continue, will come to effect. I mean, he's only, as I say, narrowly lost, so he can certainly look at a number of options. Perhaps he'll look to just work on an issue-by-issue basis with parties, win support where he can, although that's a bit risky. Or will he make a play to bring in someone else as a coalition partner for the long term? Who can possibly say? That would presumably require some concessions in order to make that work that he might not be able to stomach. So very hard to predict. It's not a complete disaster, as I say. He's only 3 short, and the LDP must be frustrated with that, but it's kept them in a position where they can continue to operate. It's a little bit of a blow, a disappointment, of course, but they presumably can continue to just carry on, get votes through as they need to, although with more difficulty. I think it's more the general trends they have to be worried about. This loss of votes to Sanseito if they don't lock that down, the obvious dissatisfaction in general with the LDP when you look at the amount of votes they've lost, and it's a party that's been dominant in Japanese politics for a long time, and the biggest thing they've got going for them is that there's no clear, obvious alternative. I mean, Sanseito were the big story in terms of breaking through this election, but the second biggest party behind them is CDP, the Constitutional Party, but the opposition is fairly fractured across Japan, but will that situation hold if they continue to lose support? Presumably not. So they have to, keep their head down, try and get good results, try and resolve issues like the Trump tariffs, the rice crisis, get things better, and just find a positive direction for themselves where they can win voters back in future. It's really what they have to be focusing on. And it'll be interesting to see if Ishiba is the one who manages to turn that around or not. I mean, much like the fractured support, it's the biggest thing going for him in terms of holding on to the party is that he was brought in as a reformer, and there's no real obvious way to go. I mean, you could talk about, say, Takashi as sort of targeting traditional right-wing votes, and Sanseito as one option, but she's not necessarily the only candidate, and I don't know necessarily if that solves all the LDP's problems. Yes, it will win them possibly some traditionalist votes if they can get them back from Sanseito, which isn't a given. But what about votes elsewhere? What about general dissatisfaction with the LDP? What about all these scandals? So you just really have to wonder what the future direction of the LDP is, and you just have to hope for their sake that they're able to get some sort of success to bring stability to Japan and resolve these issues. And it'd be absolutely fascinating to see what the future political makeup of Japan looks like and where the next election goes from here. But yeah, that really rounds out this week's episode, this quick run round of the Japan's 2025 election and looking at the results. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, everyone. This has been the Japan Politics Podcast. Sayonara, goodbye.